I'd like to introduce our next speaker, and that is Bellissimo. She is going to give us a presentation on what she was thinking, a trip down the Secret River. Bellissimo is a Florida native, writer. Her degree is a Bachelor of Arts in Mass Communications from the University of South Florida. She wrote and produced local and historical features for WNSC, an upstate outlet for the South Carolina Education Television Network, and WEPR, an outlet that was located in Clemson, South Carolina. After moving back to South Florida, she worked a variety of positions within the city of Fort Lauderdale. She retired as a municipal librarian and now spends her time researching and writing, as well as pursuing hobbies as diverse as cooking, metalsmithing, and paper crafting. Rawlings' change of heart about race can be traced back to the early influences in addition to her life experience and her presentation with her friendship with Zora Neale Hurston, as we Barbara talked a little bit about. So this presentation highlights visual comparisons between The Secret River, Uncle Tom's Cabin, Uncle Remus, and Little Black Sambo, which are books that she read while she was a young person. It also touches upon life at Cross Creek and how it affected her attitude toward race. Thank you, Colin and Bellissimo.
Well, this is the mythical River Styx that we're going to travel down today, and fortunately it's located, fortunately for my purposes, it's located between Ocala and Gainesville behind Marjorie Canan Rawlings' house at Cross Creek. So when we get started, we have our welcoming picture of Marjorie, which you can also see back there. She welcomed us to the conference today. And this is when she is probably in her early to mid 30s, and she has just written, or not just written, probably about 3 or 4 years earlier, she wrote Blood of My Blood, which was a manuscript that was not published during her lifetime. But this is where we're going to get our baseline for her attitudes towards race and to see how they changed over the years. I'll read this partially. When you come from Michigan, they are only men and women with black hides. You just don't understand. You have to know them better. And when you know them better, you still can't hate them. You still don't understand. What she's referring to here is that her ancestors landed in the Free State of Michigan, which was not a slave state, and she's indicating that she does not consider herself racist because she does not have the Southern prejudice toward blacks. However, the paragraph before this has the N-word in it frequently, and the language is rough here. And as Barbara mentioned, she was deprecating to a lot of different people in this. This is Marjorie's shadow side. She did it to close a chapter in her personal life, and once again, this is just a starting place for the rest of her life. Now, a few years later at Cross Creek, when Cross Creek was published, there were a number of racial stereotypes and things like that she has been taken to task for many times. But there's also this line: "But a Negro child will someday make a sad and lonely study for a poet." And that's what her editor, Maxwell Perkins, seized upon to write The Secret River, and that is her departure point. You can see the ship slowly starting to turn, and I was glad to hear some of the background from Barbara, because there's very little public writing or public manifestations of her attitude change. Much of it was in private letters and things like that. And here we see and this is right before, this is one of the last letters she wrote to Maxwell Perkins when she was writing The Secret River, which was sometime between 1945 and 1947. And you can see her complete attitude change, and you can see the amount of critical thinking that she has done in order to make this switch. I wanted to give a complete dignity to all the Negroes in this story with no Uncle Remus or Little Black Sambo sort of stuff, with its humorous, often deprecatory effect. And she was well aware of the effect that humor has on prejudice, and how it's a communication form. And she would carry this all the way through in The Secret River. Now, her early influences, which led up to her statement in Blood of My Blood, were Uncle Tom's Cabin, Uncle Remus, and Little Black Sambo. I threw in Parasols as Parades because it was the closest thing in timing to Secret River, and it's a good compare and contrast, although that's the only one that Marjorie almost certainly didn't read or use as an influence, either for or against her expression on race. Uncle Tom's Cabin, and there are so many scholars here, you'll say, but that's an abolitionist book. Anti-slavery, how could that have influenced her one way or the other? Well, there were memes. For instance, in the 1960s civil rights movement, Uncle Tom was a figure of fun, somebody who catered to white men. But what I think, in my personal opinion, was worse was the treatment of the black female. Topsy was used as a figure of fun through the music halls of the 1920s and into the 1930s, and even was receiving references into the 1940s. Now, I'm not sure about copyrights and things like that, so some of this picture is a fairly gentle picture of what you can find on the internet now about Topsy, and I think the personification of Topsy was Prissy in Gone with the Wind. The whole first part of the movie, she wants to help Melanie have her baby, and then the baby arrives. Oh, I don't know nothing about birthing no babies. So this Topsy was a stereotype derived from Uncle Tom that probably affected a lot of people's thinking. Now, Uncle Remus, which is one that she referred to in her letter, the storytelling device of Uncle Remus was that old Uncle Remus, who looks a lot like Uncle Tom if you go back and you look in the pictures on the internet and everything. Uncle Remus is telling the stories to a young white boy, and what he is telling are African tales that made it to the plantation. I guess you would call them Americanized African tales, and it is a historical window into that time. However, the dialect is demeaning. There are a lot of stereotypes, and in a way it's a shame because Joel Chandler Harris made it a point to fight for equal rights for the rest of his career. However, Alice Walker comes from the same town in Georgia that Joel Chandler Harris did, and said she got absolutely nothing from Uncle Remus, not even the window into that time or the emphasis on the African tales. Now this is Uncle Remus in a stereotypical type of look in an early edition. And this is the 1994 artwork where the talking animals, which are a hallmark of African folk tales, that's where the animals are emphasized. the artwork has had a huge improvement because a reader like Marjorie would have read the story of Uncle Tom's Cabin. She would have read the stories of Uncle Remus, but the artwork and the general use of stereotypes from the books would have made it, for people who didn't read as deeply as she did, I think they were much more influential than the actual stories, in my opinion. Now, Little Black Sambo is the one that was written 100% for entertainment. It was published in the UK, spent about a year over there where it was a hit, and then came over to America. Helen Bannerman, a Scottish author, wrote this book as entertainment for her 3 children on a train one time, and she used her own artwork. Now, this is an early edition, and the nice digital librarian over at University of Florida offered to give me a proper credit line, and I, of course, did not take him up on it. But the sample pictures are high resolution from the digital library at UF, and I highly recommend it, even just for entertainment reading. So anyway, we see the Sambo is supposed to be a little boy from the south of India, and we see over the years how he gets blacker and more African American. This is Mama Jumbo and Papa Jumbo, the stereotypes of which are very stereotypical black characters. And this one is a 1931 edition where Sambo is fully African American and stereotypical. And it goes on and on. If you were to take these pictures and take them out through the 1950s, you would see how they changed now. In Helen Bannerman's slight defense, and this book was not written for really popular consumption or for preserving folk tales or for abolition. The only purpose of this was entertainment. And there were so many unauthorized copies as the years went on that I don't, it's hard to assign blame to an author or to a publisher for this type of thing. Now, Parasols is for Ladies was published in 1941 in America. It involves 3 little black girls who go to work to afford their own parasols. Now, once again, if you read the story, it's an homage to the Protestant work ethic. It's a very gentle story compared to the 3 we've looked at before this, and the illustrations are very high quality. The writing is very clever. It is in dialect, and stereotypes are promoted. If you look on the internet, on Amazon, or more than half of the people who read it thought it was a great book, and the others think it's racist. Now, why did Marjorie change? Here's Marjorie with Martha Mickens. In my opinion, once again, I thought I dreamed this up myself, but then I found it in Crossing the Creek. Marjorie was a very shrewd person in some ways, and when she moved to Cross Creek and was subsequently alone for a number of years with a number of problems of her own, I think she waited to address the problem of race until she had the leverage of fame and fortune. Secondly, she relied so heavily on Martha Mickens, later Idella Parker, and Martha's extended family, that she needed the support and just the plain uncritical work that that family gave her. And I think that she became more relaxed and saw things in a better perspective on race. Of course, as Barbara mentioned, her friendship with Zora Neale Hurston she found somebody who was her equal or more, who was as educated as she was or more, and the two of them got along, and I think that was the final thing that might have changed her attitudes. Now, the Secret River, why is it different? Why is it important? I'm assuming that most of you have read the book, so I will spare you that, but Calpurnia, who's on the cusp of adolescence the same way Jodie Baxter was, her community is hungry, and she sets out on a journey to find fish, and she comes across Mother Albertha, she's not a witch, she's not an evil stepmother, she's not any of the components that we normally see in fairy tales. And I'll take a very short break here to say that Julius Scribner had given Marjorie a book of fairy tales, and apparently Marjorie read it very closely and took many of the classic elements of a fairy tale and moved them over to a very American story. She consults, anyway, to go back to our presentation, she finds a river full of fish and uses pink paper flowers, and we won't worry about the symbolism there, to lure them into her boat. On the way home, she encounters 3 predators, an owl, a panther, and a bear, and appeases each one with a fish. Now, these animals don't talk, but I believe that they are a nod to the African folk tales and the talking animals. She saves her community from hunger, another classic Marjorie theme, but she can't return to the river because it was in her mind, according to Mother Albertha. And so she is enabled, she's powerful, she can solve her own problems, but she's not going to get back to that personal river that saved her the first time. She's going to have to figure it out again the next time. Now, she opens with a classic fairy tale opening. There's a dark green forest far away in Florida. The vines with red and yellow flowers grow up on the trees. And if you sit at Marjorie's desk and look out, this is the scene you'll see. She didn't have to reach far for creativity. If you squint your eyes and you have young eyesight, you can actually see a red flower. So this is what she was drawing from in order to set up the basis for the story of the Secret River. Now, as Flo pointed out in her journal article, the Secret River was published after Martha died, and after Marjorie died, and in 1955. 1955 was the year that Emmett Till was murdered, and we just saw in the news that the last person associated with that crime has died also. In 1955 was the year that Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus. And it follows, of course, 1954, which is Brown versus the Board of Education. And Scribner's was very nervous about how to market this book to schools with the edict of Brown not actually having been figured out very well. This is the same shot in the 2009 version. We see a white Mother Albertha talking to Calpurnia. And although gender isn't always talked about with the Secret River, as I mentioned earlier, there are no wicked stepmothers. There aren't witches. Mother Albertha just, I think, happens to be an older woman who is not a crone, who doesn't say everything she knows. She advises Calpurnia to trust her intuition. So I think that was a step forward also for Marjorie. And this is roughly the picture I assume was taken about the time she either wrote or finished Secret River. This is not the girl that met us at the gate back there. She has been through many personal and professional changes, and she has lived and learned. She quite a woman. Now, this is the funeral for the yearling, in the yearling, Father Wing's funeral. And I guess I would like to take this time to combine this woman, whoops, with this funeral, and well, that threw me off a bit, but Marjorie in 1939 with the yearling. It was the last look back of the 1930s to Americans' world past. It capped off a decade and was really the least sentimental interpretation. The 30s also saw Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz. It's like she tapped into America was readying itself for what was to come, which was World War II, which changed everything completely. 5 or 6 years later, she is able to capture the wind. She and Max Perkins, I should say, are able to catch the wind again and move into the start of what was then the modern civil rights era. And that was a national mood also. And how she did that, we probably will never know. And this is the road to Antioch Cemetery on our trip, and it's also the same road from. You get to the cemetery on the same road you walk away from it. And so if we floated down the river for this presentation, then we're walking back. And we're back here at the River Styx, back here in what we consider modern times. And I'd like to thank you all very much.